This whole thing kicked off when some dude ordered this poor girl to listen up. He told her that finally, someone as worthless as our main character had a job that would actually benefit the family. The guy announced that, from now on, Croa would be a fake pharaoh, a favorite, for the head of the House of Fire, Duello Arcenta. The girl was ordered to get his first 3 nights, no matter what, which would screw up Arcenta's position. That would help their House of Water, the Amsel House, to flourish. The man warned Croa that if she failed, she'd just die a miserable death, and asked if she understood. In the carriage, the girl freaked, realizing the memories and face belonged to Croa Alose, the heroine from a novel she'd read. Croa Alose was an illegitimate daughter from a family of villains. The main character started whining, like, why of all the worlds and characters did she have to get stuck being Croa Alose? Croa was thinking about that dark, steamy novel, For Ducal Houses. The novel's hook was this crazy power inheritance thing in the 3 ducal houses. Whoever had the strongest mojo got marked as the next head. To fully unlock their power, the heir had to, seal the deal with their destined partner on their wedding night. The partner's name was magically etched onto their body. Talk about commitment. But if some other woman took the heir's first night, he'd only get half the power. Major bummer. And even hooking up with the real destined partner later wouldn't fix it. No do-overs. In the story, Croa was supposed to get iced by Alose when the real destined partner showed up. Brutal. The main character was like, no way am I going out like that. Not a chance. She bitterly thought about how she'd been tricked into inhabiting this cursed character. Was she just supposed to roll over and die? She made a solid promise to herself. That wasn't gonna happen. Since she was stuck in this body, she'd rewrite the original story and survive in Arzent, no matter what it took. All the main character realized she had to do was this one thing. Croa Alose arrived at the Arzen family estate, where Diello Arzen greeted her. Seeing him, she thought to herself that he really was the only genuinely good and pure male character in this whole story. As soon as they entered the living room, the main character asked His Grace to arrange a private conversation with him, and Diello ordered the knights to leave. The betrothed couple gave each other a frosty greeting. Croa declared that she hadn't really come to become his bride. Diello was baffled and asked if she wanted to call off the marriage, but the heroine answered no, instead stating that she had come to propose a deal. The girl offered to be his shield and a fake wife, helping him become the most powerful head of the family. All of this would last until his real partner shows up. In exchange, Croa demanded he get revenge on the Alose family, who pawned her off on him. Diello double-checked, asking if she really said the deal lasted until the real thing showed up. Croa confirmed it. The guy said he knew for a fact his name was etched on her body, so he didn't get why she was claiming to be a fake. He asked if Lady Croa was implying Duke Alose had played him for a fool. Diello coldly pointed out that, in that case, they couldn't just sit around having a nice little chat. Croa knew perfectly well the consequences if it came out she was a fake pharaoh. Divorce would be unavoidable. And even if Arcenta declared war on Alose, they'd have no comeback. She added that if she were going to keep deceiving Lord Diello, that's exactly what she'd do. Suddenly, she stood up, walked to the desk, and grabbed a bottle of healing ointment. This move threw Diello for a loop, but he had no idea what Croa was about to do next. She popped open the jar and dumped the whole thing all over her back. Then she turned around and showed him her back, where Diello Arcenta, his lordship's name, was carved in. Diallo's eyes went wide in that instant, because the inscription was starting to vanish as her skin healed up. She explained that the name had been carved there against her will. Then she asked, didn't that prove she was a fake pharaoh? Croa knows how much Alose and Cartier look down on Arcenta, and that the current head of Arcenta is considered the weakest. The young man said that even though he knew Arcenta was underestimated, he didn't realize it was this bad. He asked her what she thought Alose would do to someone who tried to deceive the head of the family. She answered herself, saying he wouldn't let someone like that live, then stated firmly that she wasn't going to follow Duke Alose's plan. She explained that even if she was planning something, she understood better than anyone that neither side would let her live. The girl repeated her proposal, a marriage that would last exactly 1 year. It was necessary to lull both families into a false sense of security until the real pharaoh appeared. It would also help eliminate Alose after the initiation, and in return, she asked His Grace to protect her. Diello asked her to explain how he could trust her, Lady Croix, who had been sent by Alose. The heroine clarified her position, noting that she had come to Arzentu alone and had no way to protect herself here. In other words, she was offering him a chance to use her to turn this crisis into an opportunity. After that fiery speech, Diallo broke into a smile, then took off his jacket and put it around the girl's shoulders. And he declared that he accepted her proposal and agreed to the marriage. There was a knock on the Duke's office door. Diallo let the maid in and asked if she'd checked everything like they discussed. She confirmed the name engraved on her back was a fake, and just like they thought, it's reacting to the healing ointment, getting weaker by the hour. The young Duke recalled his recent conversation with Croa. Back then, she offered Diallo to use her, while he looked for his real favorite and built up his strength. The girl called herself a trump card that would allow Aloze and Cardiel to keep dropping their guard. Diallo doubted it, saying the current Arzenta has no power, especially now that he's got the family head's power. The heroine pointed out that this could be prevented, but the young man bitterly noted that even Arzenta doesn't believe in it. Croa countered, saying if the guy was truly powerless, most of Arzenta's friends would have bailed on her. On top of that, Arzenta's got the best intel of the three families, so the Duke will sniff out the real favorite quick. During that talk, she seemed genuinely convinced of Duke Diallo's potential, and now His Grace is actually considering this deal with the enemy. The kid noticed that Croa definitely seemed different than before, and maybe she was hiding her true colors. The Duke read the letter addressed to him from Duke Amos, and it laid out some demands. First, they had to hand over half the revenue from the mines and farmland in Arzenta to the Alo's ducal house. It said the money was to cover the upkeep for Duchess Croa. Second, they needed to station an extra 100 Alozi knights in Tim's Gorge, between Arzenta and Aloze, because there's been a recent buildup of, undesirables there. The last point demanded that Croa be allowed to visit the Alo's ducal house at least once a month. The Duke's heartbroken to be saying goodbye so soon to such a beautiful daughter. The Duke thought to himself that it wasn't just about the massive payments for her upkeep, but also the strategically important troop placement was now tilted in Alice's favor. But what really cracked His Grace up was Duke Amos calling her a beautiful daughter. He sarcastically wondered to himself, who sends a daughter like that to the enemy as a glorified pawn? Diallo called over a maid named Piele and ordered her to be the future Duchess's personal attendant from now on. He added that Kwa should be allowed to do whatever she wants in Alo's. Kwa watched as they built an entire building for the wedding and thought it would be a truly lavish affair. The maid told her that at the banquet tonight, Kwa Alo's would be the brightest star. Peel explained that a marriage between someone from the three ducal houses was extremely rare. The heroine pointed out that, aside from three families in the royal family, everyone else believed the rumors and thought they got married after some sweet romance. The maid felt awkward and didn't know what to say. The girl remembered that in the novel, Piela was Arzenta's head maid. Also, Piela was a major player, a kind of fixer who got rid of anyone who got in Arzenta's way. Krua had only seen half of the original story, but she knew perfectly well that Piela was the one who came to behead Krua Aloz. It happened right after it came out that she was a fake favorite. That memory sent shivers down the heroine's spine. Krua also figured her deal with Diello was a big secret, but Piela probably knew about it. Krua wanted to test this and asked the maid if it was true that his lordship himself had ordered her to serve her. Piela confirmed it, stating that she was ordered to fully support Krua Aloz from today's banquet onward, and after the wedding. Krua thought that it was just as she suspected. Diello had shared information about the deal with Piela. So, turns out Piel's duties, of course, include guarding Croa herself. The heroine said she understood and asked to be treated well in the future. Piel thanked her for the trust. Croa thought to herself that, despite Piel's welcoming smile, she was wary of her. Croa admitted to herself that even though she wasn't planning on deceiving anyone, it made her even more nervous. Croa saw the Endless Sea for the first time. It's common knowledge that this territory was protected by the Arzent family, the Fire Clan. The Aloz family, the Water Clan, guarded the Infinite Forest, and the Cartier family, the Wind Clan, watched over the desert where everything turns to dust. Protecting each of these zones was an ancient agreement. Piel asked Croa what she could say about it compared to the Alozzi's Infinite Forest. Croa replied that the sea was beautiful. The maid remarked that she'd heard the Aloz were tired of water, but apparently that wasn't the case. Seriously? Croa asked, dripping with sarcasm. How can you get sick of water when you can control it? Suddenly, she wondered. The Allos family did have water powers, even though OG Croa barely used hers. Deciding to test something, she started messing with her ability, making the water in her glass float up. She was totally shocked. "What the heck is this?" she asked herself. Croa thought to herself that controlling water felt way more natural than the original story made it seem. The main character realized it wasn't just natural, it was as easy as breathing. Piela interrupted her thoughts, letting her know it was time to head to the banquet hall. The maid added that they needed to finish with the greetings, to which Croa obediently agreed. So, the main character understood that her marriage to Arzan was going to shake up the empire, and she needed to play her part perfectly. She figured she had to fake being head over heels to keep Duke Allos from catching on. The soon-to-be newlyweds greeted each other before entering the ceremonial hall. Krua reminded Diello that today they had to look like a couple totally crazy about each other, and asked if he was sure he could pull it off. Seeing his flustered reaction, she thought to herself that he was exactly like in the original story. This pure and kind guy, incapable of lying, always got thrown for a loop by his bride's willful behavior. He followed her everywhere, but she knew she couldn't let that happen today, or Duke Allos would chew her out for not keeping her husband in line. So, she decided to take the lead, telling Diello to just follow her since she'd be calling the shots. She also remembered the second weird tradition of imperial weddings, where the bride doesn't walk in with the groom. So, the bride walked into the ceremonial hall, and the banquet hall immediately buzzed with whispers. Surprise chatter rippled through the wedding guests. Many couldn't believe the houses of Arzan and Alloze were now bound by marriage. The guests' attention was especially focused on House Cartiel, whispering, wondering how they were taking this. One guest remarked that Cartiel is currently led by Smita, the most powerful head in the house's history, so they're probably doing all right. Another confirmed that the stronger the head, the stronger the knights who draw power from the house, and added that as long as Smita rules, no monsters even dare to approach their lands. Nevertheless, the guests agreed that with 2 out of the 3 ducal houses now married, Cartiel's position was uncertain. Finally, the arrival of Duke Diello of Arzan was announced at the ceremony. Instantly, the noblewomen started whispering about how handsome and grown-up he was. Then, Krua approached him. According to another unique imperial wedding tradition, only the groom can lift the bride's veil. The main character admitted to herself that, even though this was all just a show, she was a little nervous. Diallo then recited the ritual phrase, asking her to be his wife, and brought his lips to hers. But actually, their marriage wasn't sealed with a kiss. The newlyweds' lips didn't even touch. Croa was outraged, asking what was up. The Duke, wanting to keep a distance and be honest in their agreement, stated that he had no feelings for her and didn't want to take something that wasn't his. The girl assured him that she was fine with it. Croa demanded that the Duke move closer and kiss her properly. The young man listened to his chosen one, and they melted into a kiss. Everyone present gasped, watching the passionate and sweet kiss of the newlyweds. When their lips parted, the girl demanded he kiss her again, only this time deeper and longer. Then she begged the guy to love her harder, hotter, with everything he had. When he finally broke the kiss, she was gasping for air, totally blindsided. The Duke's arms were like a vice, his fingers digging into Croa's skin. Diello smirked and reminded Croa that she promised to lead. The Duke told her to do whatever she wanted, and to be bolder, to love even more. The wedding guests were scandalized, the ladies hiding their faces behind their fans, cheeks burning with embarrassment. One of them blurted out that he couldn't believe the 2 rival families were actually uniting. Another guessed that the hottest power couple in high society was about to be overthrown. Some guest philosophized that you just never know what's gonna happen. In the end, everyone agreed that Diello and Croa looked amazing together. After the wedding ceremony, a servant named Cassimus came and knocked on the Duke's chambers. Entering when permitted, the knight, Sir Cassimus, informed His Grace that everything had gone exactly as they'd anticipated. The knight clarified that the Duke and future Duchess's public appearance at the wedding today had set the whole high society buzzing. The Duke remarked that this was largely thanks to the Duchess's activity. Sir Cassimus added that Croyalode was also being talked about, but most were discussing the Duke himself, since he was behaving in a way they weren't used to seeing. Diello understood that it was because they all remembered his frail childhood. He asked if that meant he and the lady looked good together today. Cassimus confirmed that there were already rumors that the Duke and future Duchess were a total power couple. Diello was pleased, stating that the more rumors, the better, and instructed Casimus to subtly fuel the gossip without leaving a trace. The knight dutifully agreed and confirmed that he would pass this information on to the other members of House Argente. Alone with his thoughts, the young man replayed every detail of that passionate kiss he shared with her today. Diello could practically still feel the soft touch of her lips on his. Diello thought about Croa Amos, realizing everything she'd shown him until now was just a facade. So Croa was putting on an act this whole time. But today, he finally saw the real her. He remembered how she told him she'd take the lead, and all he had to do was follow. For Diello, the fact that Croa Amos revealed her true self meant she was going all in. The main character watched her subordinates, wondering why they all seemed so happy and excited about her wedding. Croa wondered to herself if things really had to be this way. Seeing everyone so cheerful felt weird, and she couldn't help but wonder if they knew what she was really like. Croa noticed that everyone seemed genuinely happy, and she thought, well, that's not so bad. On top of that, the heroine found out that news of their engagement spread like wildfire through the avant-garde of Arzen. It's like this inner circle, a community that gets the word out to the die-hard Arzen loyalists, even those who never leave Arzen, which basically means the whole household back at the Arzen estate knows the deal. Pila figured it sounded like they were pinning some serious hopes on the future Duchess. Croa asked if they looked like some kind of sickeningly sweet couple, and the maid confirmed it. Then the main character asked Piela what she really thought it looked like. The maid replied that to anyone who didn't know better, it looked pretty darn cute. But the main character needed to know what it looked like to those in the know. After all, it wasn't just the socialites watching, but the Aloes house too. Croa pressed her, asking what their engagement really looked like to those who knew the truth. Piela said everything was fine, and honestly, you could totally believe she meant it. Croa breathed a sigh of relief. Seemed like the maid wasn't lying. She counted that as a win. Suddenly, the maid burst into the bathroom. She was freaking out, yelling that something terrible had happened. The third defense sector had been breached. Croa asked Piela what that meant and what was going on. Piela said she'd find out. She went out into the hallway and asked the maid if their security system hadn't predicted this. The girl explained that the Endless Sea defense line had fallen. When asked if it was completely gone, the maid said not entirely, but the situation was critical. Croa thought that even if her marriage to Diello was just for show, she was still in charge here, and she couldn't just ignore her duties at a time like this. Turns out 2 monster squads invaded Sector 3. The first squad that hit Sector 3 was way bigger than usual. Roa, the commander on site, tried to hold off the bigger squad, but the second monster squad was also overwhelmingly large, and the defense line crumbled in a heartbeat. The maid confirmed there were way more monsters than troops stationed there. She added that, according to the knights on the scene, several monster groups had merged. Croa remembered something from the original story, that monster movements near the Endless Sea were unstable. But as far as she could remember, there weren't any specifics. The heroine also wondered how a maid, not a knight, could know so much about what was happening on the battlefield. After all, maids are usually just told about these things. She noted that it seemed like all the knights and servants on this floor were saying the same thing. Piela stated the final line of defense was held, and asked how they managed and if reinforcements arrived. The maid said that Roach, that screw-up, took full responsibility and charged right into the monster horde. While he was going berserk, the defense line was rebuilt and held, and reinforcements are on their way. Croa asked why everyone's calling him a screw-up, since he sacrificed himself to do his duty. The heroine was pissed that instead of honoring Roach's sacrifice, everyone's just taking it for granted. Piela said he didn't do his job properly in the first place. She also pointed out that if he hadn't sacrificed himself to buy time, he would have been punished even worse under the Argenta Code. Piela, noticing Croa's surprise, guessed that she hadn't seen anything like this back in Alos, so it seems weird to her. Piela explained that in Argenta, there's a strict code of conduct, and the main principle is what you absolutely must or must not do. Croa remembered that in the original story, that was the first thing mentioned about Argenta. In Argenta, if you don't do your job right, even if you give your life, you're still considered a screw-up. The book said that whoever proves their loyalty to the head of the family can use the family's power. But a family's strength depends on the head honcho's abilities, and Diello was the strongest Arzent head ever. And his power was truly overwhelming, even without a chosen one. That's why Knight Roa was able to stop so many monsters with Arzent power, by going out in a blaze of glory. Krua figured that even if he gave his life to stop some of the monsters, he didn't do it right. Meaning, if he didn't complete his mission fully, or according to the code, it's like he did nothing at all. Pila remarked that the future Duchess was adapting quickly to their harsh rules. The main character realized Diello was intentionally making himself look weak to set up plans for the future. She mentally noted that the harsh customs of the Arzent family played a part in this. She also guessed it was even harder for him because of his kind nature, which clashed with the brutal reality. Meanwhile, Diello received a report that Roa died, basically losing it from the Arzent power. He found out the knight's body was beyond repair and ordered him buried right in front of the Endless Sea. He was also informed that Croyalose heard about what happened and asked why Roa was being called a sinner. She seemed a little surprised, but Diallo took the information in stride. Then, he told his subordinate he was dismissed. The Duke mentally noted that they'd need a new commander in the 3rd District now. That thought brought a short, stifled laugh, after which he wondered, "What the hell do I do now?" Croy thought to herself that the engagement was over, and wondered when she'd fully start playing her part, since the wedding was just around the corner. Just then, Pila knocked on the door. Croy told her to come in. The maid asked if Croy was finished with the refreshments, and after getting an affirmative response, she wheeled in a huge stack of documents. The heroine suspiciously asked what they were. Piela explained that it was all the material on the business overseen by Arzenta, so it would take a long time to study everything. Krua was totally blindsided, blurting out that she was just supposed to be visiting, and she didn't need to know about Arzent's deep secrets, and frankly, she didn't want to. The maid insisted she did need to know, and started clearing the desk of documents. She explained that the lady of the house is responsible for more than just gathering intel floating around, but also for managing the family's public image and what goes on behind closed doors. Krua was fuming inside, thinking that Diello must have forgotten she was a fake, and she'd be out of here when the real deal showed up. She was bummed that this guy was so nice and trusted her way too much. The girl asked Piela if she was okay with all this, hoping for some backup. But to her dismay, Pila agreed that Krua needed to be trained and suggested starting with the southern business ventures. The guests, checking out the building that was specially built for the wedding, were totally blown away. They were asking how over-the-top the ceremony would be, practically drooling with anticipation for this historic moment. Meanwhile, Duke Alose met with Duke Diello Arzenta. Duke Alose remarked approvingly that preparations were in full swing. He asked Diello to look after his daughter, admitting she had many flaws. Diello replied that it went without saying. Duke Alose added that since the marriage bound their families together, old grudges should be forgotten, and asked him to love his daughter as a cherished wife. Diello reassured him again not to worry. Duke Alozi said goodbye until they met again soon. Diello returned the sentiment, but when no one was looking, the Duke smiled. The guests expressed their eagerness to see the bride and groom together. The arrival of Duke Diello was announced. One of the guests congratulated Duke Diello on forming a wonderful alliance. Another remarked that nothing could be better. Diello politely thanked them for their interest, but excused himself. He said he had to step away for a minute and plopped down on the couch. Out of nowhere, water just started pouring in. But hey, that's a Lowe's for you. The guests went wild when they saw it. They also noticed how cool the lights looked, reflecting in the canals. Thought it was totally awesome. The MC announced that everything was ready for the bride and groom's entrance. Croa, looking at everyone's faces, figured nobody suspected Diello's plan yet. She also noticed the groom's family's seats were empty, which wasn't a surprise. Croa figured, just like in the original story, his parents were taken out. She wondered if Diello knew that Duke Alose was the one who did it. The girl figured he probably didn't. Otherwise, he wouldn't be marrying the daughter of the guy who offed his parents. She mentally called him a poor bastard and promised herself that, even though she wasn't strong, she'd help her husband take down Duke Alose. Meanwhile, the wedding ceremony of Duke Diello Argenta and Lady Croix Mose was underway. The priest announced that from now until forever, they would be one, and asked them to seal their union with a kiss. At that moment, Croix noticed something important, a symbol of the Argenta family that had been hidden until now. Specifically, what was suppressing the head of the family's power. She understood that if Tiedjeit removed this seal, the head of the family's power would skyrocket. But if someone else did it, that power would never be able to grow again. The girl realized that she and Diello had to protect this seal. Diello kissed his bride. Then he quietly asked Kwa if they should pretend to be kissing more passionately, and she agreed. Then the young man declared that this time he'd take the lead. The young man swept his newlywed wife into his arms and kissed her tenderly. Everyone present gasped. Then Diallo thanked her for agreeing to marry him, and Krua replied that today went perfectly. After the wedding ceremony and all the celebrations were done, the newlyweds hopped into their carriage. The guests also bowed out, wishing the couple a happy honeymoon. Diallo and Krua took off. The main character remarked that the wedding went smoothly, calling it a complete success. She also said that now the main thing was for her virtue to remain with him. The young man got super flustered. Noticing this, the girl reassured her husband, telling him not to worry, and explained that they would just hold hands tonight. Arriving at the villa, Krua expressed her admiration, calling the place amazing, and noted the wealth of the Arzent family. After all, they built a separate building just for the wedding, and now a villa just for the honeymoon. Diallo said she'd like the view from up here even more, and Krua eagerly replied that she couldn't wait to see it. The guy suggested they head up right now. Krua and Diallo were soaking in the awesome scenery where the ocean meets the forest, and they both thought it was incredible. Krua asked if she remembered correctly that this place was on the border between Arzenta and Aloes, and Diallo confirmed it. Then the guy suggested they have breakfast here together tomorrow morning, and Krua agreed, promising to take care of the arrangements. One of the maids reported that Krua's things were already unpacked. She knew that some of the maids were from the Ala's household, and they'd probably be keeping tabs on them for these next 3 days. Krua suggested they chill for a bit, then check out the estate, and Diallo agreed, saying it was a great idea. The girl understood that they'd need to play the part of a couple in love for whoever was watching them. Krua complained that it's exhausting being watched all day, and Diallo said he definitely felt those eyes on them. The heroine noticed that the villa, even though it was thrown together, was pretty big and spacious. Diallo didn't think he'd have to walk around so long, checking out the villa. That evening, Diallo suggested a drink. Krua happily agreed, saying if someone offers you a drink, you gotta take it. The girl said they needed to keep up appearances until the real favorite arrived. The young man agreed. Then she tasted the drink and found it sweet and fragrant, asking for another glass. Diallo poured her some wine. Krua drank it with pleasure, then suggested they have another glass. But Diallo replied that, unfortunately, what she drank was the last of it, and said it was time to call it a night, and they went to sleep. Lying in bed, Krua was thinking about how the real favorite would be arriving in 2 months. The girl couldn't give the exact date of the favorite's arrival. It would look suspicious. So, she basically said the contract was for a year, but she'd have to leave this place in 2 months. Then Diallo noticed Krua's thoughtful look and asked if something was wrong, but Krua immediately denied it. And she said he was handsome and compared his eyes to the sea. Krua was a little flustered. To justify herself, she said that even though they weren't a real couple, she could say it because it was true. Diallo replied that the real sea is much darker and deeper, but Krua said that, nevertheless, the sea looks that color from afar. Then Diallo agreed, and Krua warmly said that they were having a pretty nice, heartfelt honeymoon. Diallo replied that he was glad that the young lady Krua was enjoying it. The heroine protested that she wasn't a young lady anymore, but Diallo kept calling her that. The main character told Diallo that to look like a real couple, they needed to be at least a little close, and she suggested practicing calling each other by their first names. Diallo first called his young wife Krua Aloes, but she wondered why add the last name, since it creates distance, and asked him to just call her by her first name. Diallo, he said, kinda shy. And Krua was like, awesome! That's the right answer, dude! Then, she brought up her promise about, keeping things PG with her husband, but she said that to fool anyone watching, they gotta spend the nights together, like tonight. Then she admitted she wanted to ask him something. When Diallo asked what, she whispered something in his ear. Diallo asked if she was totally sure about this plan, and she said it was a must. Krua then quoted the Arzent principle, which is basically, do or do not. And she said, if you're gonna do it, you gotta go all in. So Diallo caved and said, all right, fine. A few seconds later, she yelped in pain. One day, the main character was chilling in a gazebo outside. Pila brought the lady some light low-rail tea, said to help with fatigue. Krua told the maid to take some tea to His Excellency as well, mentioning he was working in his study and must be tired. Krua breathed a sigh of relief that those pesky Alose were leaving today, and she could finally get a little break. She mentally told herself to just hang in there a little longer. Suddenly, a child's scream echoed through the halls. The maid asked the lady what they should do, and she told them to bring the child to her. When the crying child was brought in, Krua asked him why he was crying. The child, through tears, replied that his mommy was gone. The boy wailed that she was just right there, but now she's gone. Krua asked the maid if any of the staff had a child, but she replied that there were definitely no servants with children in the Arzen house. Krua tried to soothe the child, telling him not to cry, but he just kept screaming and calling for his mommy. Seeing how upset the kid was, the heroine decided to go look for his mom with him herself. Pila voiced her concerns about safety. The Duchess replied that everything was fine. She trusted Alos and Arzente, but really, Krua understood they had no reason to mess with her. She added that the maid shouldn't tell anyone, so others wouldn't worry, because what could a kid even do, right? Pila reluctantly agreed, but wanted to assign a guard to the Duchess, just in case. As soon as that suggestion was made, the boy's cries and wails started up again. Krua, noticing the kid was scared, really stressed, and didn't want to waste time, decided to quickly go alone. After a little while, the heroine asked the boy if he was calmer and feeling any better, but he walked silently and completely calmly, then pointed somewhere. Krua asked if he saw his mom over there, but the kid ignored the question again. He just silently dragged her that way. That's when Krua realized he wasn't fazed by the tight security and had come specifically for her. Now the girl understood the reason for his appearance. There was a high probability that this kid could mess things up for her. Krua wasn't too worried, though, because she was sure someone was following her, like her maid. When they got to a place where there was no one around, the boy stopped abruptly and addressed the heroine as Krua Alos. Seeing the seal on his hand, the girl guessed that he was one of the Alozi family's watchdogs. The little spy asked Krua if it was true that she'd spent the night with Duke Arzent. The main character confirmed it, and then the kid demanded proof. He needed anything that could serve as evidence that she'd spent the night with Duke Arzent. Krua realized it was a good thing she'd asked Diallo for one thing yesterday, and she started to hesitantly unbutton her shirt. Images from that night flashed before her eyes. Why was this surfacing now of all times? She decided this wasn't the moment to dwell on it. First and foremost, she needed to keep her cool. She showed the little spy some marks on her neck and asked if that was enough. The kid said he'd already seen everything he needed to see. Just then, the kid's mom showed up and called out sweetly to her son. He ran to her, happy to see his mom. Krua thought to herself that she arrived just in the nick of time. In her head, she admitted she suspected they'd come to check things out, but not this quickly. She drew a comparison to the original story. In that version, Krua, determined to deceive Diallo, did spend the night with him, but there was no scene in the novel where the Duchess had to prove it to anyone. The main character remembered asking Diallo that night if the marks were definitely there and if they were clearly visible. Diallo gently traced her collarbone, confirming the marks were definitely there. It was like she could still feel the ghost of his lips on her skin. Krua wondered why these intrusive memories were popping into her head right now, and she couldn't help but question how Diallo managed to fake their wedding night so convincingly. A while later, the Duke watched from the window as his brand-new Duchess was attended to by her maids. Just then, he was suddenly hit with a memory of their conversation on their wedding night. She'd insisted they needed to be prepared for anything and asked him to do her a favor. Diallo wondered if Krua somehow knew Alos would send someone to check up on her. He figured she must have known just how observant Duke Alos really was. He also considered the possibility that Krua was still working for someone in Alos's camp. The Duke thought to himself that the Arzent estate was secure. From the outside, it was an impenetrable, high wall, promising peace and safety within. Diallo admitted to himself that he still couldn't fully trust Krua Alos. That's why he decided to keep her inside the Arzent estate for now. He thought to himself, if she really is an Alos, she's gonna have to play this very carefully. But if she came to help the Arzent family, he hoped her marriage proposal was genuine. That night, Krua thought over everything that happened and realized that, no matter how she looked at it, asking for proof was a bit much. The heroine wondered, what kind of proof did they even expect? She also realized showing up as a kid with magic was kinda sus. Just then, Diallo knocked on the door and asked if he could come in. Krua was surprised he was being so polite, knocking before entering their room, so of course she said yes. The Duke apologized for not spending the day with his wife and for rushing off to the family estate on urgent business. The Duchess said it was fine, and since it was so urgent, Alose probably wouldn't suspect a thing. Krua added that it would look weird if she went into the study. Besides, she kept glancing at the door, and she played the part of a sad new bride, desperately waiting for her husband to come downstairs. Diello said he must have looked like a real jerk, since he never even bothered to come down. The girl smirked and said that at least Duke Amos didn't get the impression it wasn't a love match. Then, Krua got down to business about Duke Amos, telling Diello that he'd checked the evidence from the previous night before leaving. Diello asked Krua, surprised, if she seriously thought Duke Amos himself came to check the evidence. Krua snapped back that of course it wasn't him personally. Diello said with relief that he almost got the wrong idea about Duke Amos. Krua retorted that Duke Amos is still the enemy, and what's there to misunderstand about that? Then the girl said that, regardless, thanks to this, they got through the first hurdle. Diallo asked her to clarify what she meant. In response, Qua pointed to the lily crest, the symbol of House Argenta, implying that the hurdle was a test from her family. Qua explained to Diallo that Duke Amos is just waiting for her to pluck that lily. Apparently, that mark fades, depending on how Diallo gives his sincerity and purity to his spouse. She clarified that there's no reason for it to disappear anytime soon, not until a real favorite shows up. Diallo said that he understood. Qua reassured him, saying that until a real favorite shows up, everything will stay exactly as it is now. Then she said there's one thing they need to get straight. Diallo asked her to specify what it was. The heroine asked if he was sure no one in Argenta knew their secret, and noted that she at least knew that Piela was in on it. Qua clarified that the maid isn't dumb enough not to figure it out. The heroine asked, all sarcastic, wouldn't it be a problem for Diallo if his partner was such a screw-up? Diallo agreed Piela knew. Croa then pressed Diallo to tell her, exactly, who she could trust in Arzen. The guy replied she didn't need to sweat it. Anyone from Arzen who makes it up to the 4th floor is good in his book. Croa asked, surprised, so everyone from Arzen who hangs out on the 4th floor is in the know? Diallo confirmed it with a smile, and told her not to worry her pretty little head about it. The main character wondered how he could be so nonchalant. Diallo explained that those who move around the 4th floor with that ability are the real deal from Arzen, and they're trustworthy. The young man added that a true Arzen knows damn well that betrayal is a bonehead move. The Duke said he understood Croa's concerns, but once she got to know the people of Arzen better, she'd see things differently. He killed the lights and wished her good night. The next day, Pila brought Croa a magic contract. He was supposed to be signed off by a member of their house who was about to move to another family. The maid explained that when someone belonging to the Arzen family leaves, they sign a magical contract. That way, he guarantees he can't reveal any family secrets. The Duchess's job is to get the required person's signature. Croa, reading the contract, noted that it had the head of the house's name on it, so it must be important. The girl doubted whether it was okay to show something like this to her, a second in command, even though she's married to the Duke. The contract stated that from the moment it's signed, the person who is leaving the Arzen name can't say a word about Arzen anywhere. If he tries to talk about Arzen, the head of the house's flame will personally, let's just say it'll be a bad day for him and everyone around him. Croa asked Peel in surprise about the head of the house's flame, and whether it's even right to create contracts like that. The maid replied that it doesn't happen often, but it does from time to time, and she's rarely seen anyone break the terms. Croa understood that it was an Arzen tradition, but it seemed strange that the gentle and timid Diello would personally enforce the contract. Despite her doubts, Croa told Piela they'd head out now to meet the guy who was waiting. So, our main character followed the maid. Croa and Piela arrived in a room where a man named Mirta was already waiting for them. The maid introduced him as the servant who would be signing the contract. Mirta greeted the Duchess politely, saying it was an honor to meet her. Croa saw a quill and a dagger on the table. She asked in horror, "Where's the ink?" And then it hit her. Blood was needed to sign the contract. Piela told Mirta that he knew exactly how this contract was signed. Mirta said with bitter irony that it never even crossed his mind he'd be the one writing this contract. The maid said it's time to cut the BS and get down to business. The guy grabbed a dagger and sliced open his arm. The main character gasped, a mix of disgust and pity on her face as she watched. Krua confirmed her suspicions, noting that, just as she thought, the blood was being used as ink. The heroine thought to herself that it must hurt like hell. Mirta finished writing and let the mistress know. She complimented him on a job well done. Then Piela turned to Mirta and said, "Of course, she trusted that it wouldn't happen. But if he ever broke that oath, he'd find himself right back here, facing the consequences outlined in the agreement." She told him to remember his promise. Mirta replied that yes, of course he would remember. After the contract was signed, Mirta thanked Krua for witnessing it. He said it was an honor to meet her, even briefly. The Duchess asked him why he was leaving Arzen. Mirta replied that his wife's parents were elsewhere, and she wanted to spend her final moments with them. Krua said she understood, wished Mirta good news only, and bid him farewell. The man thanked her. Piela said she'd escort Mirta to his carriage, and Krua told her to do it properly. Left alone, the heroine wondered if this was clearly some kind of personal issue for Arzen, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd gotten involved in something she shouldn't have. The girl asked herself if this contract was the reason Diello was so sure Arzen wouldn't betray him. And yet, she wondered again, who exactly are the people from Arzen? Later, Piela told the Duchess that Mirta originally served Diello. Krua figured if he served Diallo directly, they must have been pretty tight. She guessed Diallo probably went through some serious stuff before ordering a contract like that. Then, Krua headed to her husband's office to hand him Mirta's signed magic contract. She knocked on his office door, and he told her to come in. Seeing his wife, Diallo was pretty surprised she came in person. Plus, she brought the contract earlier than expected, so the young man thanked her. Right then, Krua noticed Diallo had a dagger in his desk too, similar to the one used to sign the contract. The Duke did the same thing with the dagger that Mirta did, made a cut, dipped a pen in the blood instead of ink, and signed the paper. Then, he sealed the contract with fire. Krua told Diallo she heard Mirta used to serve him personally until recently. The young guy confirmed it and added it was a real shame. Krua reminded Diallo that they were worried about potential traitors yesterday, but he said there wouldn't be any. She explained that pulling off a betrayal isn't easy. You need to feel confident everything will go smoothly. The girl pointed out that Mirta served Diallo personally, so she didn't think it would be a problem. Diallo agreed with her, thanked her for her concern, and said he'd see her tonight. Krua replied that Diallo should take care of himself. To herself, Krua thought they really did seem like a newlywed couple. After the Duchess left, the Duke glanced at the contract, pondered something, then called for Sir Rick. Diallo ordered the knight to keep an eye on Mirta, but then the Duke changed his mind and ordered him to watch those who'd been bought off by Cartiel. The Duke explained that being watched by Arzenta would make them cautious. If they try to contact Cartiel, tell him right away. The Duke said he'd handle them himself. Sir Rick confirmed, "Got it." Now that the Duke sent Rick, head of intel, Mirta is completely in Arzian's sights. Every move he makes will be watched. He remembered Croa's words with a touch of irony. "You need to be damn sure you'll get away with it to betray someone." Diallo mentally agreed with his wife. People usually don't stab you in the back unless they think they can get away with it. But the problem is, they think they can, and they're dead wrong. They figured his current situation, marrying a fake favorite, makes him vulnerable. They think this is the perfect time to smoke out the traitors in our ranks, because they mistakenly believe he's weak. He reminded himself that Arzen's rules don't forgive betrayal. A messenger burst into Diallo's office with an urgent report about unusual activity in the 4th sector of the Endless Sea. His Grace couldn't believe his ears and asked again, surprised, if the problem really concerned Sector 4. The messenger confirmed it and added that Commander Radius is on the scene requesting his orders. The Duke was shocked that it involved his uncle and ordered him to be brought here immediately. Krua asked Piela if Diallo left because of a sudden issue. Piela confirmed it, adding that this time, the trouble's in Sector 4. Krua clarified, "Are we talking about the Endless Sea then?" And thought, he must still be worried about that last big attack. Piela agreed that could be it, and added, "Even though the Duke seems gentle on the outside, he was born with the strength of a true family head." The main character wondered to herself, "Why am I so worried about him?" Krua asked Piela if it was true that Diallo left without saying anything, and remarked that it was kind of unexpected. Piela confirmed it. Yeah, he rushed to the scene. Krua said she understood, and hoped her husband would return safe and sound. Then, Piela brought the last document for signing. The Duchess, skimming it, asked, "What's this about shadow wards?" Piela explained that the shadows are the ones who provide aid to the families of those who died doing Arzen's jobs. She added that in this district, the Roa family, the family of a criminal, will become shadow wards, and the Duke ordered that they be treated with extra care. The main character remembered. Roa heroically defended Arzan in the last battle in the third sector of the Endless Sea. Back then, she thought everyone was too harsh on him, but apparently there's more to it. She noted that it's just like the Duke, and she asked, "What kind of support do the families cared for by the shadows receive?" Pila explained that they not only get the right to live on Arzan's land and in Arzan's buildings, and a guarantee they'll be set for life, no money worries. So, whether you're just living on their land or actually family, loyalty to the Arzentis runs pretty damn deep. Krua admitted those were some sweet perks. And yeah, being part of the Arzentis definitely has its advantages. Then she asked, "What's the catch? What do you gotta do to join the Arzentis?" Pila replied, "The main thing is showing you've got a special talent." The maid had heard that folks in other families also had abilities tied to their element, and asked, "What about Aloes?" Krua said that at Aloes, most of the mansion staff could control water, but the vibe was a little different. You could get a job at the mansion even without powers. The heroine added that, besides, she'd never heard about any magical contracts or shadow support. So, the girl figured the shadow system was probably just an Argenta thing. Maybe that's why the Argenta vibe was different from the other families. Suddenly, the main character heard someone banging on the door. She got a bad feeling and told them to come in. A knight showed up in the room, apologizing to the lady. And he said they needed backup from District 4. The heroine was super surprised, because her husband was headed there. She asked if they really still needed reinforcements. The knight said yes, and added that the Duke himself ordered them to ask for help. The main character realized she had a weird feeling about this. In the original novel, this was the incident where Diello's only uncle, Ridius Argenta, passed away in a magical mishap. And that's what kicks off the crisis for Argenta and Diello. In the book, this happens after Croy Alos gets hitched to Diello Arzent. And just before the real Pharaoh arrives at the mansion, the heroine asks how much backup they need. The subordinate reported that the fight's dragging on, and they'll be clearing debris at the scene for a while. So they need enough reinforcements to wrap things up fast. The maid cheerfully chimed in that this was already good news. The main character thought to herself that they clearly didn't know the situation at the scene had gotten seriously worse. She pondered that the experienced Commander Ridius couldn't have died, especially with Diello backing him up. If it weren't for one thing, in the story, the Arzents never saw a water magic using monster coming. So, Ridius had no choice but to, make the ultimate sacrifice to stop the madness. Thanks to Ridius's, heroic actions, the 4th District was protected. If things stay as they are, everything will follow the original tragic script. Ridius Arzent isn't just Amello's only blood relative, but also a key figure in the Arzent's power. The heroine told herself there was no way she could just let him die. Not that she had any pathetic intentions, of course. Besides, it was crucial for her own safety down the line. Then, the main character barked out an order to immediately assemble and dispatch reinforcements. She added that they needed to be as massive as possible. Frustrated, Krua thought that she was the only one who knew about the water monsters, and she almost spilled the beans about something she shouldn't have, which could have caused a whole mess of problems. As for the size of the squad, she figured she'd let the knights decide what was best. So, the main character agreed to send reinforcements, but demanded a security detail in return, since she was part of Aloes. The knight and the maid were surprised and asked what that meant, but she didn't answer. Suddenly, the tea in the cup and the water in the vase started rising, like a whirlwind was making them move. Everyone in the room was totally freaked out. Krua thought to herself that if Diallo needed backup, things must be way worse than they thought. Since it's a coastal area, Krua wondered, shouldn't Aloes, who commands the waters, be the one going? The maid promised to report back right after the meeting, and the Duchess agreed. Alone in her chambers, Krua thought about the Arzent family, her husband, and her own future. The girl decided she had to stop this tragedy from happening, but the main character had no idea where Diallo was right now, or what he was up against. Diallo had really come to hate the sea, because from a distance, that shimmering ocean looked so damn beautiful. But once he saw how the local creatures were constantly threatening the land, and how Arzent's sacrifice kept repeating itself over and over, it started to make him sick to his stomach. Diello flashed back to a childhood memory, the whole room filled with his sobs and crying. Suddenly, Diello's uncle walked into the room, but the boy kept bawling. Between sobs, he confessed to his uncle that he hated the sea, explaining that he'd lost everyone because of the creatures there. His uncle sternly told him to cut it out, explaining that a lot of people wanted to see Diello fall and that he needed to toughen up. He also said his nephew would have to get used to sacrifices and remember that you can't trust anyone. His uncle advised him to remember from then on that to survive, Diello had to become cold and unfeeling, and ordered him to look not at one member of Arzen, but at all of Arzen. The boy started crying again and threw himself into his uncle's arms. Diello confessed that he'd been thinking a lot about that conversation today, probably because he'd been sent to the place his uncle commanded. He shared that he had a bad feeling about this. Deep down, the kid was really hoping his gut feeling was wrong. The knights fought like hell. They gave it everything they had, but they were already spent. The knights thought, in despair, that this was it. Suddenly, the Duke himself jumped into the fray, yelling that Argenta's flame still burned. The knights' spirits soared, and they shouted for joy that the chief himself had arrived on the battlefield. His Grace ordered everyone to hold the line. The knights were stoked that it worked, because the monsters were falling back. One of the knights blurted out, shocked, that there's no way a monster using water magic could show up. There were way more monsters than before. The Duke drew his sword again, swung it, and unleashed a torrent of fire. But a second later, the young man realized with horror that his magic wasn't reaching its target. From this distance, Diallo had no way to break through that wall. Looks like the intel about a monster using fire magic appearing in the Cardiel-protected desert was right. They said the head of the Cardiel clan, who commands the wind, quickly suppressed the creature using magic. But Diallo, who hadn't awakened Pharaoh, could only hold them back. What's worse, even if he requested reinforcements from the estate, it wouldn't help much since he hadn't accounted for how much the monsters could change. Commander Radius admitted it was his fault for only requesting a small squad, because the assessment didn't consider the monsters' adaptability. Suddenly, the commander announced that he'd decided to sacrifice himself to stop the monsters. The Duke figured if Uncle pulled something crazy, they could at least minimize the damage. But those words were going to be his last will and testament. The commander was standing his ground, begging the boss for permission. The boss was like, "This is total batshit." Suddenly, a woman's scream cut through the air. Turns out it was Krua Aloz, showing up with backup. The main character activated her power and yelled to her husband that she'd stop the sea. The result totally blew everyone's minds. The monsters vanished, and the sea seemed to freeze solid. Or rather, Krua was controlling it. The girl suspected her ability would get stronger near the source of power, but she never expected it to go this hard. Before shipping out, the main character was practicing controlling her power. The girl figured the more she used this ability, the easier it would be to handle. Turns out, Krua could even create shapes on purpose. She gave herself a mental pat on the back for practicing in her downtime. She noted that the original Krua's power was pretty weak sauce, but now the main character is totally different. There was no other way to put it. After she took over the body, the ability changed too. The lady was informed that everything was ready to go, and they were good to move out. Krua was super stoked, because everything was going according to plan, and way more people showed up than expected. The heroine gave the order for the entire army to head for Sector 4. By the way, riding a horse felt pretty familiar. Looks like the original Krua wasn't just experienced at riding, but actually had a knack for it. "Ma'am, we've just been informed they'll be reaching Sector 4 soon." The heroine knew that today's battle had to be a win if her future plans were going to happen. Even so, she had serious doubts about how much she could actually help. Plus, the closer they got to the front lines, the more Alos's blood was boiling. So, the main character arrived on the scene and started tearing through those monsters. The knights watched, totally blown away by how the Duchess was single-handedly controlling that massive surge. They were holding on to hope that she would protect them, and Krua admitted to herself that she was even surprised by her own power. Even being so close to the sea, the heroine wasn't expecting her abilities to get such a huge boost. The girl wondered just how strong the other members of the Alos clan were. And what if Pentus Alos, the next head of the family, awakened Pharaoh? He'd be showing off a whole different level of power. For a second, the girl let herself think that maybe she wouldn't end up like in the original story. Using a power like that, right now? How could they not pick her to be the next head of the family? Lost in thought, she almost missed that monster's attack. Time to crank up the power again. Diallo watched his wife, thinking to himself, "That's some serious juice she's packing." made him wonder just how strong Dukelos actually is. Then the kid asked Croa, "Where'd the monster go? Did it just vanish?" But Croa said, "Nah, it's hiding, but the wave's getting bigger." The girl yelled, "I see it!" Turns out it was hiding under the wave. Hiding or not, it's not gonna help. She knew this was her shot, and she was gonna give it everything she had. But no matter how hard she tried, it wasn't enough. Croa was starting to doubt she could take it down in one hit. This monster controls water. We clearly need some serious firepower. That's when Diallo turned to Croa and offered to lend a hand. The kid unleashed a torrent of fire on the monster and totally wiped it out. Everyone around went wild, cheering that they finally did it. The Duke, all proud and booming, announced the water monster was dead, then ordered the battlefield cleared. Croa was thinking about how untapped power like that was way stronger than she thought. And then there's Diallo. But suddenly, the main character's thoughts were cut short, and everything started spinning. Diallo called out to his wife, managed to catch her, and anxiously asked what was wrong. Getting no answer, the young man got pissed, asking what Croa was even doing out here in the first place. The girl explained she was worried, because she didn't need a wounded partner, plus she wanted to help out a little. Diallo thanked Croa, the girl silently adding that, knowing her husband's personality, she figured he wouldn't be able to fight properly. Maybe Diallo isn't the guy she thought he was. After a while, His Grace sat by his exhausted wife's bedside, gently stroking her hair. Fresh memories of the recent battle washed over Diallo. He remembered being told the battlefield was clear, and in response, he ordered them to leave. His subordinate suggested escorting the lady, but he refused, the Duke declaring he'd take her himself. On the way to the palace, Diallo noted to himself that a strange scent was making him dizzy. It was the smell of the sea, which the young man hated so much. But now it seemed like nectar, quenching his thirst. Now, sitting by his wife's bed, Diallo mentally concluded that everything happened because of her. After countless betrayals and the death of his parents, the young man tried not to get attached to anyone. He always had to be ruthless and never shy away from anyone's demise. But what if there's someone who's untouched by this sea of death and can stand up to it fearlessly? Looks like that's Croa Aloz. When the main character woke up, she immediately recognized the familiar ceiling and realized she'd made it back to the estate safe and sound. Croa could barely twitch a finger, feeling like all the moisture had evaporated from her body, and her mouth was parched. Word is, when all three families use their powerful abilities, each one suffers different side effects. Just then, a maid came into the room, noticed her mistress was awake, and offered to call a doctor. But the Duchess refused the doctor and asked instead to be informed if Lord Radius was all right. The maid double-checked, asking if the lady was really worried about the 4th Sector commander. The Duchess wanted to know if all the troops involved in the battle were okay, and what our losses were. The maid said Lord Radius and the 4th Sector troops only suffered minor injuries. She also added that Lord Radius already checked in on you and then headed straight back to the 4th Sector. The Duchess was surprised that Lord Radius had already come by and asked how long she'd been out of it. The maid replied that you were unconscious for about a day and a half, which really shocked her. The maid told her that thanks to her support in the battle, the 4th Sector's losses were minimal. The Duchess said with relief, "Thank goodness, that means I helped." Then she told her to let the Duke know she's okay. The maid protested, saying he ordered a doctor to be called as soon as the Duchess woke up, so the Duchess reluctantly agreed. Shortly after, the maid announced the arrival of a doctor named Nias. The doctor greeted her, saying, "For the glory of Arzenta," and asked permission to examine her, which she granted. Sir Nias checked her out and said she just needs some serious rest, and she'll bounce back real soon. Nothing major going on. He also told her to give him a shout the second she feels even a little off. She agreed, thanked him, and promised to be careful. The doc left, praising Arsenta. Alone again, Krua wondered why she'd been hearing so much about Arsenta lately. Soon, someone knocked on the Duchess's door again, asking if they could come in. Without looking up, the Duchess said, "Yeah, come on in." Getting the go-ahead, the guests entered and greeted her in unison, praising Arsenta. And in that instant, she saw a smiling crowd of knights and maids before her, and she also said, "Praise Arsenta." The main character wondered, is this what a fighting brotherhood is? Everyone's saying praise Arsenta like they're in on some inside joke. Pila figured it wasn't so much about the fighting brotherhood as it was about how much of an impression the lady made on Arsenta. Krua asked her to explain why that was. The maid noted that even for Arcenta, going through all that for Arcenta is a really big deal. And the lady jumped right into the thick of it, even more so than Argenta herself. Now Argenta thinks the lady's passed her first test. The maid added that even though her power isn't fire-based, she also believes the lady passed the trial. The Duchess asked what that meant. Pila explained it's a trial to become a true member of Argenta. You gotta survive there without weapons, relying only on your flame. If the test subject bites the dust, their power becomes part of the clan head. But if they survive, they become a true member of Argenta. The lady thought to herself that it's just another survive or die situation. On the other hand, Croa understood the invisible connection felt between Argenta members. Then came the thought that she doesn't know when she'll be leaving this place. The main character was overcome by a strange feeling related to the thought of becoming an Argenta. Despite all this, the decision that she has to leave won't change. After all, the real pharaoh is coming soon, so it's time to start getting ready. Croa called out to a servant and ordered her to bring a map of the continent. The main character made a mental note that deep inland, there was a place where she could live without fear and in comfort. Of course, it was Daisy Grove. Right now, it's just a forest full of wild animals and monsters. But in a few years, a huge canal will be built around the forest, along the river. The girl decided she needed to focus on real estate. That was the future, and buying now seemed like a sure thing. However, there was one problem, namely, she didn't have the funds to buy ahead of time. The girl was tormented by the question of where to get the money. Suddenly, a breathless Diallo burst into the room. He blurted out that he was worried sick about his beloved and wanted to get to her as soon as possible. But there was always some kind of trouble happening on the coast. Krua asked if he was sorry he wasn't there when she woke up. The guy said yes and thanked her. She said it was cool. She knew he was busy. Diallo asked if he heard right from Dr. Nias and if she was really okay. She explained it was her first time using her powers, so her body was shocked. But she's fine now. He pointed out that she really pushed herself too hard. But he admitted if she hadn't, a lot of people would have paid the price. Thanks to Krua, a lot of people made it. Diallo added that he should tell his wife not to do that again. But her power is so tempting, he's afraid he won't be able to stop her if it happens again. He finished by asking what he should do. Krua replied that she'll keep helping, since they're in this together, until they get what they want from the Alozi family. Diallo thanked his wife for something and told her a letter had arrived from Duke Alaz. To her surprised question about the letter, he explained he thought she should see it too and brought it over. In the letter, as promised, the Duke expressed his desire to meet with Croa. The heroine guessed the likely goal of the letter was to check on the progress of the plan to, compromise Diallo Arzent. Croa remarked that at a time when she already had so many plans for the future, this was just what she'd expect from Duke Alos. Then she remembered that Duke Alos had set conditions for the sham marriage, and one of them was particularly unfair. The Alos family was to be paid half the income from Arzent's important mines and cultivated lands for the Duchess's upkeep. With that realization, Croa happily realized she'd found her funding source. Diallo asked the girl what was up with her, to which she, laughing, replied that it was nothing special. Then the guy asked what was on her lap and recognized a map. Croa confirmed it was a map of the continent and explained that she had asked Piela to bring it to her. The Duchess said she wants to live near Daisy Grove when she leaves Argenta. Those words hit Diallo hard. Noticing his reaction, she asked him what was bothering him so much. He repeated her words back to her, asking what she meant about leaving Argenta someday. The guy didn't want to believe what he heard, and trying to change the subject, suggested she go to bed first. He said he needed to finish up some work. Croa agreed to turn in, mentioning that her husband always works so hard. Diallo walked down the hallway, turning over Croa's words in his head, wanting to live near Daisy Grove. When she leaves Argenta, he figured that her choice of location had something to do with the big river that runs near the woods. He considered the possibility, however unlikely, that she was planning to use the river's power to take out all the Alozis, and then face Argenta alone. But Diallo immediately dismissed the idea, deciding Croa wasn't that reckless. That's when the guy asked himself the big question: why would she even leave? But a voice inside him snapped, saying he was only seeing one side of the story. Argenta won't let Croa Aloz, who's gotten so deep into Argenta's secrets, live. The guy realized with a jolt that once the real pharaoh shows up, Croa will be useless, and instead of a peaceful retirement, they'll just Eliminate her. The thought of her being taken out like that hit him hard. He wondered if he was really gonna let that happen, especially since he'd considered doing it himself. Diallo admitted he was having second thoughts. Was it just because she was his only real ally? Or maybe because she saved a bunch of people in Argenta? Or could it be he actually cared about Croa? He kept mulling it over, wondering if it was just her useful skills that were making him hesitate, and he silently whispered his sweetheart's name. Then his thoughts took a different turn. He figured if Pharaoh was delayed, maybe things could just stay the way they are. Diallo even started thinking that might actually be better. A thought formed in his mind, directed at Croa. She was too good for Alozi. Not just good, but a total freakin' star. The thought sparked a fresh wave of regret. She wasn't the real Pharaoh. If she could actually become the real Pharaoh, that would be even better. During their goodbye before the trip, the main character assured her husband she'd be back without a hitch. She said she was good at playing the part, and told him not to worry his head. Diallo said he understood, and would be counting the seconds till she got back. So, the main character arrived at Duke Aloz's estate. The Duke, greeting Croa, invited her inside. He said he was thrilled to see her, and Croa returned the greeting. When he asked how she was doing, she told him she was enjoying a happy married life, thanks to his kindness. The Duke seemed pleased, but then said that while he was happy to welcome her, he figured the pleasantries were over. He suggested they head to the drawing room where some refreshments were waiting, and chat in private. Croa agreed. She internally scoffed at his hypocrisy, wondering what he was plotting this time. Meanwhile, the Duke addressed everyone, suggesting they give a father and daughter some space to reconnect. The man asked if it would be too much to ask that her escorts not follow them. He feigned surprise, asking if Argenta really couldn't spare a father and daughter even a moment alone, and he expressed outrage, suggesting they thought he might do something bad to his own daughter. The servants obediently complied and bowed. Getting what he wanted, the Duke noted with satisfaction that this was how it should be. He ordered the escorts to wait outside the estate until their conversation was over. The servants sadly and angrily watched their mistress walk away. So, the Duke asked Croa how things were progressing, mentioning he'd heard they were inseparable. Croa reported that she managed to stay in the same room as Diallo. The Duke was surprised, asking if the maid from Alos was in the reception room. Croa explained that the problem was that Diallo Arcenta was too uptight. The girl had a bad feeling about it. She noted that her husband has a very innocent nature and explained that because of her background, he needs time to open up to her. The Duke asked incredulously if she wasn't even trying, and Croa replied that, of course, she was trying. But she reminded him that it wasn't enough to just pop his cherry, to which the Duke dryly confirmed that he knew that. Croa explained that Diallo wouldn't want to get involved with her until he opened his heart to her, which is necessary to remove the seal from his abilities. She added that it would therefore take time. The Duke scoffed and asked if she couldn't have figured that out sooner. He hinted that physical intimacy isn't all it's cracked up to be, and straight up asked if she was bad at it. Croa thought to herself with disgust that she knew he was a piece of trash. But meeting him now, I finally get it. He's even worse than I thought. Croa felt the heavy air closing in and realized she was suffocating. The Duke implied she hadn't understood his instructions to seduce that kid, no matter what it takes. She tried to whisper that she was doing everything she could, but her father just ignored her. He sneered, asking if Diallo was already past it at his age. The main character thought to herself that he was not only cold-blooded, but also a real piece of work. Croa mentally called him the lowest of the low and started to explain that it wasn't that simple. Things weren't as they seemed. She said that Diallo claims he can't spend the night with her because his heart just isn't in the whole physical intimacy thing. Croa silently apologized to Amel for lying, explaining that she had to save herself first. She continued that if she forced him to sleep with her, it would only shut his heart down completely. So she's trying to get closer to him bit by bit, and she's got an idea about that. The Duke asked her what it was. Croa went on to explain to the Duke that you gotta do something to win a young man's heart. But this house is practically broke, except for the money set aside for the Duchess's upkeep, so she asked if at least a tenth of that money could be transferred to her account. Out of the blue, the Duke agreed it made sense and gave the go-ahead to transfer some funds to her. But he added a condition. Next time, she better come back with better results. And he wanted to make sure she understood. The girl promised she got it and breathed a sigh of relief. realizing she pulled it off. Now, no more money problems. As she was leaving, she thought, that was a close call, but I'll figure it out somehow. Suddenly, the Duke stopped her and reminded her about the name Diallo Arzent tattooed on her back. He said he was going to get his face rearranged. The attendants waited quietly for the Duchess near the carriage. After a while, the main character slowly approached the carriage, barely able to put one foot in front of the other. She told the maid they were leaving immediately, and the maid noticed she looked terrible. Pila relayed the order to the coachman and asked the Duchess if she was all right. But Croa didn't answer. She felt incredibly sick and slumped down in her seat. The maids screamed in alarm, their fear intensifying when they saw blood seeping from under her dress. Seeing their mistress losing consciousness, the maids started shouting her name and begging her to wake up. Croa replied that she was fine, and it would pass soon. Piela asked what had happened at the Alloz estate. Croa just gasped in pain, and the maid politely asked permission to examine her mistress's back. With her okay, she started checking her out. Seeing the state of her back, Piela asked, horrified, "Ma'am, were you this messed up last time you came back?" Croa confirmed it, reminding her, "You knew the Duke's name was a fake tattoo, right?" Piela agreed, but said, "Even so, this is way too messed up and brutal." The maid promised to give first aid right away, adding, "I'll tell the driver to take it easy so you're comfortable, ma'am, even if it means we're a little late getting to the estate." Croa thanked her. As it got dark, Diello checked his watch, annoyed, and wondered, "Why is my wife so late? Did something happen?" Suddenly, his lordship was informed that his wife had arrived. Diello said, irritated, "She's late." Spotting her in the hallway, the young guy asked if something was up. She looked rough, was shaking like a leaf, and shot back, asking why he wasn't asleep yet. Diallo noticed it, even though she was forcing a smile. He figured she'd marked herself again. When she asked, surprised, how he knew, Diallo said he just guessed, and insisted the wound needed a proper cleaning. Croa replied she already got it patched up, and he shouldn't worry, it'll heal eventually. But Diallo wouldn't let it go and demanded to clean the wound again, properly this time. Croa finally gave in. She said she'd be grateful if he did. Diallo thought to himself that her smiling face, after everything that happened, was driving people nuts. When Diallo started cleaning the wound, Croa yelped in pain. He told her to speak up if it got too bad. "So?" Croa said with a hint of sarcasm. "You gonna make this not hurt?" The guy just shook his head. "Nope." "Then hurry it up, will ya?" she snapped. "This is kinda rough." He promised, "I'll try to get it over with quick." Croa groaned. "Even straightening my arm hurts like hell." She begged, "Just, please, do it fast, okay?" Then Diallo's eyes went wide. He'd spotted the bruises. The main character felt him freeze up. "Hey," she asked, "you okay? What's wrong?" He stammered, Nothing, just gonna finish up here real quick." Cross was relieved to hear that. The bandaging was done. Diallo announced, "All finished." Croix thanked him, and he replied, "Don't mention it." Then he told her, "All right, get undressed and get some sleep." That caught her off guard. He explained, "Even if there's extra padding on your back, the friction from your clothes will make the pain worse. Best to just take them off." Croa agreed it made sense, but still thought to herself that lying together, so exposed, was kinda weird, and she wondered if she was overreacting, being all jumpy around this innocent guy. Seeing her hesitate, the young man told her not to worry about a thing. Diello reminded her that they had a deal. He explained it was just about holding hands. Croa seemed to get it and bravely tossed her robe aside. The young couple lay there, looking at each other. Suddenly, Diello called her name. When she answered, the young man said it looked like this wasn't gonna work out. That surprised Croa, and she anxiously asked what wasn't gonna work out. Suddenly, Diello grabbed the pillow from behind Croa and gave it to her, which confused her a little. He said he figured she wouldn't be comfy sleeping on her side, so he suggested hugging a pillow. Croa, laughing a little embarrassed, admitted she'd thought he was suggesting something else entirely. Then, she thanked him for being so thoughtful. The guy also told her to pull up the blanket, guessing it would get chilly. He smirked and asked if she was spooked again, and Croa told Diello not to tease her about it. The guy took his wife's hand and wished her good night, using her name, and Croa wished him good night too. When she woke up in the morning, the main character noticed her husband was still sound asleep. She was surprised he was still out cold, saying that wasn't like him, and figured he must be exhausted. Just then, a maid peeked into the room, but the main character gestured for her not to make any noise or come in. The main character was wondering if something had happened. But then she remembered today was shadow delivery day, and it needed final approval. Final approval for the shadow delivery is just inspecting the shipment, which takes time, sure, but it's not hard. She figured they patched her up real good, so she should do something to pay it back. The girl noticed Diallo treated the wound so carefully with medicine, it hurt less than she expected, and she guessed if she took good care of it, maybe it would heal fast. When the maid asked how she was feeling, Krua thanked her for her concern and said she felt way better than yesterday. Then she announced today was the final approval for the shadow delivery, and she'd handle it instead of His Grace. The maid asked Krua if she really wanted to jump right back into work and suggested she rest a bit, but Krua refused. She explained that if she rested, it would look like something went down at the Aloes estate yesterday. The heroine added that if you're gonna lie, you gotta commit. The maid agreed, but asked her to say something right away if things got rough. The Duchess promised she would. Meanwhile, Diallo woke up and didn't find Krua in bed, but he did find a note that Krua had left for him. The note said that since Diallo was sleeping soundly and she was up early, she'd take care of finalizing the shadow shipment approval. She wanted to repay him for his caring treatment. Reading this, Diallo was first surprised, then thoughtful. He noted to himself that it was sweet and remembered the warmth of her small hand and her even breathing. Then, the young man quietly and tenderly spoke her name. Some time later, the Duke was observing his beloved from afar. He was informed that Duke Aloes had sent Krua money for her upkeep. Diallo asked, curious, what the amount was. The subordinate reported that it was roughly a tenth of his entire fortune. His Grace is thinking things over and ordered us to keep tabs on the Duchess. He figured to himself, that's a serious chunk of change for personal use, and he guessed she wouldn't blow it on jewels or parties like those other high society dames. He speculated she might use it to buy land. Then his thoughts jumped to her abilities. The powers of the next head of Aloes, Pentas Aloes, are nothing compared to hers. He noted that Alos's water element has an edge over Arzenta's fire, and Pharaoh isn't showing up for years. Diallo wondered if Pentas Aloes was really stronger than Krua. Why cook up a scheme with a fake Pharaoh? Thinking about Krua, the young man remembered her saying it was just a card to lull Alozi into a false sense of security. He added that she didn't say it was this valuable a card. The young man admitted to himself, how could he not want her after feeling that raw power in the sea? He realized he wanted her more and more and couldn't let her go. Just then, the servant interrupted his thoughts, saying someone wanted to meet with him in secret. When the Duke asked to confirm if it was really in secret, the servant affirmed. Then, the servant explained that the one requesting the meeting was someone claiming to be the real Pharaoh. He added that the guest claimed the Duke knew her, and rushing to the Diallo reception room, he ordered a thorough check of this Pharaoh. In the reception room, the so-called guest was lounging on a small sofa. Diallo recognized her as Benaya, who was known as a traitor to Argenta. She greeted the Duke, saying it had been a long time. The girl specified, more precisely, since the previous Duke and Duchess of Argenta had died. When he demanded to know who killed his parents, she told him not to look at her so angrily. She asked what could be done if she was a pharaoh. She added that he was probably surprised she got into Arzen without a hitch, but told him not to blame his people. Benia stated they simply didn't dare stop her, since Duke Aloes ordered them to leave her alone, because he's got her back. Diallo, watching her, noticed the former Arzen wielded the power of water, but sensed something was off. He realized it wasn't pure water power like Kroa Amoz's. The water power Benaya possessed felt tainted somehow. The young man immediately figured out Benaya was clearly lying about everything. He realized she didn't know Duke Aloes already sent Kroa as the pharaoh. He concluded that if Duke Amos knew Benia was the real pharaoh, he'd have already paid her off or taken her out. This made him wonder, what secret is this traitor hiding? Benaya feigned surprise, remarking that Diallo Arzen, a guy who seemed like he couldn't hurt a fly, killed his parents. She figured Duke Aloes probably thought his plan had worked. But she, who was running back and forth between Aloze and Arzenta back then, knew the truth. She claimed Diallo let the previous Duke and Duchess die, said he could have saved them, but he didn't. Benaya demanded he confirm she was right, but Diallo didn't say a word. Instead, the kid asked, why him? He bitterly wondered why the person he should love was someone else, not Krua. Benia cut him off, popping up and asking Amel accusingly if she was really that bad. She reminded him she'd kept his secret, even though she knew about it. Diallo thought to himself how cleverly she spun that around. Of course, she kept quiet because of the risk of attracting Arzenta's intel network. Then she got to the point, asking about this fake pharaoh, and mentioned she'd heard about the lavish wedding. And she asked with a sneer if he'd already given up his innocence to her out of sheer stupidity. Judging by the fact that he wasn't surprised to see her, she figured he already knew Kra was a fake. She said she didn't know what he was planning, but demanded he off Kra ASAP, and then they could start setting up their rooms. The girl offered that if he was having trouble, dealing with people, she could handle it for him. Diallo wondered what the rush was. Benia explained that becoming the Duchess of Arzeta would end 8 years of being pushed around, and she could finally live large. She added that she was more important to Arzeta than that phony, and demanded he get the place ready like yesterday. Otherwise, she threatened to spread some nasty rumors around. In response, Diallo asked her if she knew why he'd just sat back, while the previous Duke and Duchess kicked the bucket. Benia guessed that the young man was just dying to become Duke, but he stated that the dukedom was his anyway, and asked again, so what was in it for him? Not getting an answer, Diallo said he found it amusing watching a rabbit stare right into the jaws of a predator without realizing it. He added he doesn't like moths drawn to a flame, and asked if she remembered his life being in danger back then. To her returning question of whether his body was weak, he responded negatively. He explained it's practically unheard of for someone who inherited blood thicker than his father, or any Arzentas, to be weak from birth. The young man explained that, basically, if you don't have the physical strength, you can't handle that kind of magic. He confessed he knew that if she had powerful magic, the head of the family's mark would soon pass to whoever possessed it, and that when the head of the family changes, the family head's pharaoh is no longer needed. With a smirk, Diallo asked who poisoned him. The next Duke, then? He declared he wouldn't hesitate to take out anyone who tried to take him out, including Benia, who knows this secret. Fear froze on the girl's face, but without showing it, she reminded him that she is a pharaoh, so Diallo can't kill her. Benia told him to knock it off and start planning their wedding, saying it wasn't too late for Arzin to find a real pharaoh. He pointed out it wasn't too late, but actually too early, since Alloz and Cartier still had Arzin under tight surveillance, and not enough traitors have crawled out of the woodwork inside Arzin yet. He figured that an Arzin traitor with water powers, even if they're a little murky, is a pharaoh. And most importantly, if Croy finds out a real pharaoh showed up, their contract's up, and she'll ditch Arzin. Diallo bitterly thought how great it would be if Croy, who's a better fit for Arzin, was the pharaoh instead of someone like Benia. He wondered what the difference was between Benaya and Croy, and what Benaya had that Croy didn't, why Benaya became his pharaoh. Diallo ordered them to make that traitor's life a living hell, digging up every single dirty detail. He added that the mistress of Arzin can't be some flighty representative, which infuriated Benaya. Benia screamed, calling herself his pharaoh, demanding he let her go. But Diallo was set on getting something perfect. He declared straight up that she wasn't the pharaoh he should love, but the pharaoh he couldn't help but love. Piela, coming in after Croy invited her, said she brought the map she'd asked for. The main character thanked her and said that now they needed to start getting ready, little by little. She told Piela to buy up small plots of land in that area under a fake name, so nobody would notice. Croix added that she shouldn't forget to buy it with her money, and the maid confirmed she understood everything. Then, the lady asked Piela to create a whole new commoner identity for her. The maid asked to clarify, was the lady talking about, official papers? Croix confirmed, explaining that she couldn't just go to that land and live under her real name, could she? Suddenly, Diallo knocked on the door and asked if he could come in. Croix, laughing a little awkwardly, said he already had and invited him to come on in. He noticed she was going over the Daisy Grove files again. She confirmed it, adding that she needed to review them from time to time. The young man wondered if she was actually planning on going to Daisy Grove. Krua replied that either way, when the real pharaoh showed up, she, the ex-wife, would just be in the way. Suddenly, the main character realized it had been quite a while since she'd saved Redius Arzent. Based on that, she concluded that the real pharaoh must be showing up soon, according to the plot. She anxiously asked if she'd already appeared, but Diallo sharply denied it. And then, out of the blue, he suggested she just become an Arzent. This shocked Krua, and she asked what he meant. Krua told her husband it wasn't as simple as it sounded. He asked, "Why not?" The girl cited the common belief that men and women can't just be friends. She asked him how he was going to introduce her. The young dude said he'd just introduce her as Arzent. Krua, kinda panicking, replied that if he did that, she'd be in deep trouble. She imagined constantly looking over her shoulder at the new wife, being the talk of the town among the upper crust. Krua added that the very thought of it already freaked her out, so she was politely turning down her husband's offer. In conclusion, she firmly stated that she just wanted to live out her days in peace, and to do that, she needed to get out of here. To herself, she noticed that Diello looked visibly bummed out by her words. Krua, with a touch of annoyance, remarked that with a heart that pure, he'd have a tough time surviving in this dog-eat-dog world. But she promised to drop by Arzent every now and then, and Krua asked her husband not to look so down. Then she asked if there was any news about the real pharaoh. Diello answered that there wasn't, not yet. That answer threw Krua for a loop, and she wondered why not yet. She started doubting herself, wondering if she remembered the sequence of events wrong. Maybe she messed up the timeline. The main character asked, surprised, if there was really no news, and when Diallo confirmed it, she double-checked if he was serious. She pointed out that something was fishy and started wondering if saving Radius Arzent was the only thing she changed from the original story. She worriedly asked herself if that had such a huge impact that even the arrival time of the real pharaoh had changed. The main character admitted she wished Pharaoh would get here soon, and Diallo said he felt the same way. Ultimately, Krua decided there was nothing she could do about it right now, so she'd just observe the situation for a while. She noted with annoyance that she couldn't even work because of this worry, and thought she should probably take a little break. Krua glanced out the window and noticed that Amel looked like crap. The main character guessed that there were some more troubles brewing over at the Endless Sea. If Diallo has to go there himself, then this must be serious. The Duchess stepped into the hallway and asked the maid what was going on. Pila said that there was a situation brewing at the Endless Sea border, and he'd gone to deal with it, but said it wasn't too bad. Krua mentally breathed a sigh of relief. The fact that they had time to tell her this time meant things probably weren't that dire. Later, Krua told the maid she wanted to take a little walk, since she couldn't focus on work today. Pila said she understood and would get ready. As she went down the stairs, Krua thought maybe she'd stroll in the garden at sunset. Suddenly, she stopped and asked in surprise what those people were doing there, recognizing them as knights who were always on the 4th floor. The heroine wondered why the 4th floor knights were on the 1st floor. Piela informed her that Lord Diallo had stationed them there. Suddenly, shouts of fire broke out, and the Duchess asked what the commotion was. A servant girl rushed in, saying the head of the family's office was on fire with Murta's contract. Krua thought in horror. Could it be? Pila confirmed that it looked like he'd broken the rules. In her mind, the main character noted that Murta had finally escaped. She wondered which family he'd blabbed to about her. Krua realized with dread that this was happening while Diello was away. She figured whatever family it was, if her secret got out, she was toast. The heroine decided that since Diello was on campaign, she had to go after him immediately herself. She asked if they could track Murta's location. She was told that according to the shadows, his route led to the northern border region. Krua concluded it was Wind Cartel. Krua pointed out that there was a mountain range between Cartel and Arzenta, and asked how he planned to cross the mountains. Then it hit her. Why go by land? There was a way to get there by sea, on a ship. Maybe Murta, along with whoever controls the wind, had taken a ship. A ship that cuts through the water using the wind is way faster than traveling by land. Piela agreed, and sadly concluded that if that's the case, they'd never catch up to Myrta. But the Duchess declared they could. She said firmly that she's starting the chase immediately because after all, it's water. The Duke was thanked for his personal presence, which made everything end quickly. It was noted that, thankfully, there weren't any magical monsters like the ones that popped up in District 4 last time. Diello ordered the area to be cleared quickly and thanked the commander of the operation in District 1, Amos. However, Diello noted something strange, since he specifically told Cassilis that a small squad could handle this. Besides, he added that it's been a while since he only used his sword instead of fire. He guessed that he felt an emotion at the tip of his sword, and suddenly his thoughts went back to his conversation with Krua. Diello remembered how he suggested she just become Arzenta, but she politely declined, saying she'd prefer a peaceful old age. He bitterly called it a flat-out rejection, though to be fair, his memory of Croy's words was a little twisted. The young man wondered with a sinking feeling if Croy really hated staying in Arzent that much. She's always scheming to ditch the estate, and if that wasn't enough, now she's worrying about getting old. He noticed that with her smiling face, it was like nothing was even going on. Diallo admitted to himself that he was so ticked off, it was driving him nuts. His Grace summoned Casiris and asked where that double-crossing Myrta was, the one they reported on last. Casiris reported that he was on the north coast. The Duke announced he was in a foul mood, which meant the timing was perfect. He also ordered a ship prepared, because they were heading to the north coast. Casiris pointed out that men had already been sent to grab Myrta, and the Duke confirmed that he knew that. And he announced that this time he wouldn't hold a formal trial for the traitor back at the estate, but would deal with him personally, right then and there. Meanwhile, our main character was sailing on a ship. She asked if it was true that whirlpools periodically formed in the sea off Cartier, and when they usually subsided. The maid replied that the whirlpool had appeared 2 days ago, so definitely not today. She guessed that Myrta and Cartier's people would be waiting on the nearest deserted island until the whirlpool died down. Croa concluded that if they were waiting on a deserted island, it meant the whirlpool would disappear soon. She noted that time was already running out and decided they needed to pick up the pace. Soon she spotted a deserted island, but she noticed there were 2 ships there. Croa disembarked from the ship onto the island. Suddenly, she noted with surprise that they were in the middle of the sea and spotted a familiar male figure. No way! She couldn't believe Diallo was actually here. A second later, she noticed the bodies scattered around her beloved. He asked Croa how she ended up here. She explained that while he was on the battlefield, she got a message from the office saying the Myrta contract was going up in flames. So she came in his place. Croa, looking at the aftermath, asked if he was responsible for all of this. The young man said sadly that enforcing the contract was a real bummer, since he wrote it hoping it wouldn't be broken. He added that he didn't expect Croa to show up here. Croa admitted she didn't think she'd see Diallo here either, or rather, didn't think she'd see him like this. Diallo apologized for her having to see him this way. She mentally noted the strong smell of blood. Did Croa ask if he found out about Myrta breaking the contract during the campaign and came straight here? Diallo confirmed that he feels it when a contract is broken and explained that Argenta has too many rules. The punishment for a traitor goes without saying. Croa asked him in horror what kind of person he was, but the young man didn't answer, instead reminding Croa that she'd talked about wanting to leave Argenta, which she confirmed. He stated that he didn't think Croa would tell Argenta's secrets to just anyone, but he pointed out that she's also learned a few things about Argenta. He said she understands perfectly, and suggested she stay in Argenta since she fits in so well. Croa countered that they'd already talked about this, but he insisted that not only him, but many in Argenta want her to stay. He promised to try and convince Pile, and Croa wondered in surprise what that meant. Then Diallo clarified that Pile's opinion doesn't matter, and that he can make sure it doesn't matter. The heroine thought to herself that when he begged with that face, it was a real heart-tugger. Suddenly, the young man changed his tune, stopped pleading with the girl to stay, and his voice became stern and serious. Diallo said that if Croa refused him and didn't stay in Arzent, he'd be really bummed out. Croa finally decided to say something, but noticed he was shaking. Diallo didn't let her speak. He confessed that he hated goodbyes. He pointed out that the sea had only ever brought him departures from Arzent, and Croa knew that wasn't a lie. She remembered that, even though she only knew half of the original story, it definitely mentioned something like that. Little Diallo used to sit by the sea, endlessly waiting for the night to return, even though he'd died on the battlefield 10 days ago. But back then, young Diallo wasn't ready to accept it. The main character could understand that a kind soul like Diallo was suffering. The girl suggested that the young man calm down first, and promised she wouldn't just up and leave without warning. Diallo asked if she was promising him that was true, and Croa confirmed that she really was promising. She promised Diallo that even after the real pharaoh showed up, they wouldn't be separated right away, and the young man thanked her. Croa figured she should toughen him up mentally before leaving. Plus, she had to tread carefully, not wanting to hurt him. Just then, Pili interrupted, apologizing for bothering them, but said it was time to deal with the fallout. Croa agreed and told Diemo it was time for them to go, and he didn't argue. Then, he announced they needed to cover their tracks and head back to Argentu, and the knights responded that they would obey. Krua told her husband he needed to work on his expression, and he asked, surprised, what she meant. She explained that if the young man showed his enemies his normal face, like he just did, he'd become easy prey. The girl suggested Diallo try making a scary face. He tried, but she commented that he looked like he was unhappy with his meal. The heroine decided this wasn't gonna fly and promised to teach him herself. Krua smirked and announced she'd teach her husband how to act bad, how to be a charismatic ruler, the whole shebang. She pointed out she wasn't as naive as Diallo and could be a good teacher. The guy replied it was a great honor for Krua to be his teacher. Krua started with lesson 1. Stop smiling so damn brightly. Then she suggested he rest for now, while she went upstairs to check things out. The heroine explained that the sea monsters were getting more dangerous, so she was going. Suddenly, he grabbed a dagger and cut his shoulder. Krua anxiously noticed Diallo was bleeding and worriedly asked if he was okay, and what happened. She said she hadn't seen the wound before. The young man explained that during the battle, he felt Mirtha's sword graze his arm, but didn't think anything of it. He figured the wound must have gradually reopened after that. The main girl offered to get a doctor right away, but the guy refused and just asked her to stay with him. He explained that with other possible traitors around, he didn't want to broadcast his condition. Not here, not back at the mansion. The girl agreed that made sense and offered to stop the bleeding first, promising to watch over him until it healed. Diallo agreed and thanked her. So, as the main girl bandaged Diallo, he admitted he thought Mirtha would have made a smarter choice, considering how long they'd known each other. Krua asked if he really thought someone he'd known for a long time wouldn't betray him, and the guy bitterly confirmed it. The girl, annoyed, called him an idiot and said that this wasn't gonna fly, that it was just too much. She worried that if things kept going like this, there were definitely going to be issues down the line. Krua decided she needed to seize this opportunity and spell things out for him. She asked her husband if he was investigating those planning to defect to Cartiel. He replied that the informants would figure it out soon. Arzenta's intel division wasn't a joke, especially its head, Rick. They say he's crazy about Arzenta, a truly devoted servant, even though his nickname is Paleface Psycho. She suggested the intel division stick to their job, and they'd ferret out the traitors their own way. The young man was surprised and asked how. The heroine, with a sly smile, told him he'd see for himself later. Rumors spread through the palace. People were shocked Arzenta had a traitor. Things were better when the previous duke was alive. By the way, they say Cartiel wanted to use the defectors from Arzenta. He wanted to squeeze information out of Mirtha, and then, well, you know, the usual bad stuff. Krua explained to her husband that she thought if they spread that rumor, they could catch other traitors too. Diallo called the idea brilliant. Krua mentally noted that she was successfully using what her body remembered about how the original heroine would act in such situations. The Duke got word that these guys heard the rumor and figured they were screwed out of getting into Cartiel, so they tried to bolt. But these punks aren't cracking. The knights asked what they should do with them. One of the subordinates suggested they take care of them themselves. Then, Krua asked Diallo if she could interrogate them herself. The Duke agreed, but warned her they wouldn't talk easily, not even if they were staring down death. The girl replied that there are plenty of ways to scare a guy without killing him, and asked for 2 rooms to be prepared. Ideally, there should be a glass wall between them, but if not, make sure the sound carries. The heroine declared she'd teach her husband how to make a man talk, without having to off him. She told him to pay close attention. He thought to himself, looking at Krua with her shining eyes. What else does she want from him? The Duke was hailed by a knight who announced he was ready to carry out his order. His Grace said to do everything the Duchess tells you. Just as expected from Arzen's intelligence division, they were frighteningly skilled, carrying out all of Diallo's orders with razor-sharp precision. It looked like Diallo had the intelligence division under his thumb. Maybe it was because the most loyal people of Arzen were gathered here. Then Diallo turned his gaze to Krua, and his face instantly lit up with a smile. The young man asked his wife if she needed anything else. Krua answered in the negative, stating that it was enough, and Diallo suggested the heroine go with him. The main character stated sternly that there were many who wanted to get into Cartiel. She also knew that they were going to sneak away one by one, taking turns so as not to arouse suspicion. All right, the Duchess says everyone better listen up. She just announced that this whole place is going to start flooding, little by little. Then she ordered the knights to crank open the faucets to full blast. The prisoners suddenly started freaking out, yelling that the water's rising. And the pressure's insane. Krua explained that the water will only start to go down on the side where they name the traitor, and the water that goes down will just move to the other side. Our girl asked if they're seriously going to keep their mouths shut. Diello was wondering if his beloved was going to keep turning up the heat or just finish this the same way. Suddenly, the Duchess ordered them to turn the taps all the way open. A scream ripped through the air. As the water crept up to their chins, the prisoners started shouting names. One traitor even yelled out Ilian's name. A second one screamed that Antara was a traitor too. One of the backstabbers shouted Ottavio's name. Another yelled out Hubert's, and then a whole bunch more names got thrown around. Then the prisoners were desperately screaming that they were drowning and begging for mercy, and Diallo noticed that Croa was shaking. Looks like she's seriously stressed out. But Diallo was super surprised by this, and mentally asked Croa why she was freaking out. Croa Aloes, known as the villainess, is so ruthless and cruel. She's known to have dealt with servants in the past, all because they disrespected her due to her weak innate abilities. Croa's nature was known to be absolutely savage and heartless, and that was her whole deal. But now, she looked like she'd never messed with anyone's life before. It seemed like yet another new side to her. The traitor croaked that there were no more traitors, swearing he was telling the truth. Then the Duchess asked if that meant there were 13 traitors in total. The intel agents confirmed it, and she double-checked that they'd gotten it all down. The main character waved her hand. In an instant, the shackles and chains binding the prisoners snapped apart. The traitors were able to surface and finally take a full breath. Krua turned to Diello, explaining she hadn't offed them yet because they might still know something. Diello was surprised and asked if he was supposed to do the questioning himself, and Krua confirmed it, reminding him that he was the head of the family. She said the kid needs to get used to interrogations, no way around it, so he should stop looking so pathetic. She added, "It's better to survive with a little dirt on you than to die with a clean slate." Diallo said he'd try to take her advice, and Croix told him she was going to go get some rest. Stepping into the hallway and closing the door behind her, the main character wondered if maybe she should have stayed with Diallo, but she immediately snapped at herself, declaring that the young man needed to toughen up too. The girl mentally urged him to pull himself together and expressed her confidence that he could do it. After that, she turned to Pile, telling her there was a place they needed to go, and asked her to lead the way. Croix's destination was the first floor of the main building, which had been blocked by the knight from the 4th floor last time. The girl explained that they needed to figure out why knights from the 4th floor were stationed on the 1st, so the Duke had been silently standing and watching the prisoners the whole time. The prisoners started begging the boss to spare them, promising to live like ghosts. The boss figured that since Krua left them alive, she wanted to teach him mercy, and the prisoners started thanking him. But then he announced that, unlike his bride's expectations, he wasn't refined, but a wild beast. After that, their desperate cries for help echoed out. The guy explained that he would listen to his bride, who wanted him to show them mercy. He's letting them choose for themselves, whether they want to go up and smoke or drown in the drink. So, standing on the 1st floor, the main character was confused. She pointed out that it used to be packed with 4th floor knights, but now it's back to just rookies. Krua guessed to herself that there must be a reason why key Argentinites were assigned here. Suddenly, it clicked for the girl. The knights were just guarding this entrance. Then the lady asked, "What's behind that door?" The maid told her it was just a passage to the basement. The main character remembered that in the original story, that place was only described as off-limits to the staff. She figured that the fact there were so many 4th floor knights here meant there was something important inside. Suddenly, like he sprouted from the ground, Diallo showed up out of nowhere. He asked Croa if she'd happened to hear the story about the, let's just say, eccentric Earl. The Earl let his wife go anywhere, but told her the basement was strictly forbidden. The main character wondered if Diallo was playing the role of the eccentric Earl. Croa pointed out that meant he was literally telling her to stop right there. She doesn't know why they're being so secretive, but the more they hide, the fishier it gets. The girl figured that, even though it's weird, going in without permission could be a huge red flag. So, since they're telling her not to go, she won't. Then she asked if the interrogation of the traitor was going well, and got a yes. She gave Diallo props, telling him to keep at it. When out of nowhere, the kid asks if she wants to head down to the basement. The main character was totally blindsided by that question. Krua pointed out that the count in that story didn't seem too keen on opening the door. Diallo corrected her, reminding her he's a duke now. The girl figured the logic was messed up, but since he's offering, why say no? She happily agreed. Once they were down in the basement, the girl spotted a statue. Diallo explained that it was a statue dedicated to the sea god. Krua was confused, finding an idol of a sea deity in the basement of fiery Arzen. She thought to herself that people who value skill above all else wouldn't put their faith in gods. Suddenly, they were met by a man who introduced himself as Rick. He was a loyal and devoted servant of Arzen, holding the position of head of intelligence. He greeted the Duchess enthusiastically, saying it was a great honor to meet her. The heroine, a little nervous, replied that it was a pleasure to meet him too. And to herself, she thought, "This is it, Arzen's head of intel, that shining psychopath Rick." He claimed he was there because he'd been praying for Arzen's well-being and safety. Krua thought to herself that it was super sus that Arzen's biggest fanboy was praying to the sea god. Even though she didn't know the reason, one thing was definitely clear. Rick was full of it. Diallo informed them that this place used to be an underground prison, so she figured out this place was built pretty recently and wanted to know why things changed now. Diallo said he thought she, Krua, might dig it, so he had the whole setup done here. He added that they believe in the sea god and Alos, then got flustered, pointing out there's only one statue here so far. After hearing him out, she figured that even though something still felt off, it was probably nothing. Late that night, Krua thought it was time to crash when a maid reported she had intel. After getting the okay to come in, she announced a fire in the outbuilding, adding luckily, it didn't spread. Krua was super surprised, like, how does a fire even happen in Arzent, home of the fire masters? The maid pointed out that sometimes, even your own pet dogs can bite you. She called it an unforeseen accident, but Krua was super skeptical about that. She thought Piela seemed way too chill, even if the damage was minimal. She started piecing things together. Mirta's betrayal, the string of other crimes, and the punishments that followed. And the Intel Division, which, let's be honest, is known for arranging these kinds of unfortunate incidents. The main character figured there were just too many coincidences. It was like everything was meticulously planned out. Finally, she told the maid she understood everything and let her go. As she lay in bed, she admitted to herself with a bitter sigh that she knew Argenta was ruthless with their enemies. But now she felt it even more intensely. She started wondering that if the time came for her to leave this family, what would happen to her then? Krua decided that, of course, she was going to maintain close ties with them, but she needed to make them understand that even after she left, she would remain their ally. The main character didn't notice herself drifting off to sleep. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden appearance of fire. "It's burning!" she yelled, then wondered aloud, "Is that Diallo? Could it be?" Everything was engulfed in this crazy fire, furniture crackling and breaking apart. The heat was unbearable. She felt like she was about to be toast. She couldn't breathe. She knew she had to put out the blanket. Krua realized with a jolt that she couldn't use her water powers. All the water around her had evaporated. She was totally cut off. She figured she had to bail. The whole building was about to come down. A fresh wave of panic hit her at the thought of little Diallo getting crushed. Then, she had this weird flash. She didn't understand why she knew who this kid was, or what was going to happen next. "How do I know this?" she asked herself, then concluded, "It's just a dream." After that, she quietly said, "I get it now. This must be the nightmare that Krua in the original story was always plagued by." The kid kept bawling his eyes out, shaking like a leaf. The girl just couldn't ditch him. She steeled herself, deciding they were getting out of this together. She walked over and called out to him, her voice soft. The kid looked up at her, his face all tear-streaked. And it hit the main character like a shot of ice water when she saw the kid had black hair and blue eyes. Krua's suspicions were confirmed. It was definitely little Diallo, but he whispered that he couldn't make it out. The kid kept saying the fire was too intense, that there was no way out. Krua realized in despair that they were trapped. Little Diallo wouldn't stop yelling for her to get out of there, 'cause they couldn't both be saved. The main character shouted the boy's name and started begging him to just hold on. Suddenly, the tables turned. She realized with surprise and relief that this was the real Diallo with her now. He looked worried and asked if she'd had a nightmare, saying she was pale and had been calling his name in her sleep. Krua confirmed she dreamt that she and some kid were trapped in a burning building. She reassured him, saying she sometimes has dreams like that, so it's no big deal. And everything's fine, no need to worry. The guy sighed in relief and thanked God. But she was thinking that was her first nightmare since she got here, and it felt way too real. She remembered that the original Krua also suffered from nightmares, and apparently, it was unavoidable for her too. Krua made up her mind that even if the dreams torment her, she can't let them come true. They have to protect this Lily. Then she turned to Diallo, asking if the meeting of the three houses was soon, and he confirmed that it was. He started explaining that every 3 years, the three families gather to discuss guarding the ancient shrines. But according to him, right now, it's just about sizing each other up and putting the squeeze on the weak. He warned that a crisis is brewing and things are getting complicated. But what really worried her was his Lily. She pointed out that if it shines that bright, it'll raise suspicion. Krua started thinking hard about what to do and analyzing the other house's positions. Duke Aloes knows she's not the real pharaoh, and he's furious his plan failed. He even tried to shake her down for cash. Meanwhile, Duke Cardiel believes she is pharaoh, but he's wondering why the weakest leader of Arzan hasn't grabbed her yet. The heroine figured Duke Cardiel will try to expose their scheme, so that Bright Lily is a real problem right now. They decided they needed to hide it, at least for the duration of the assembly. Diallo agreed, but mentioned it tickled, and Krua snapped back at him. She was scared that if anyone saw them talking like that, they might think she was just messing around with him. She started making excuses, saying she was just checking how to hide the lily, and the guy confirmed it was super important. The girl explained that if they hid it, the other families would chill out. But he shot back, warning her they'd still try to check for the lily. When she asked if makeup would hide the lily, he said no way, explaining the lily's magic would still show through. The girl figured he was right. She could feel that weird energy herself, that pharaoh power blocking the Argenta head's strength. She concluded that any mage from the three families would recognize it, so just hiding the lily wasn't enough. They needed to hide her magic to fool everyone, and Diallo asked how the heck they'd do that. After thinking, he said there was a way, but there was one major catch. When asked, Diallo was curious to know what it was. The main girl replied that the only person who knows how to hide magic is currently in Alos,